listening to the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brenna Hicks, the Kid Counselor. This is the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast, where I give you insight, awareness, and enlightenment about your parenting and your relationship with your kids. In the last episode, I know that I promised you another rule of thumb episode about you can't give away that which you don't possess, but we're actually taking a little bit of a break from that series because we went away this weekend for Memorial Day, and I had all kinds of experiences with parents and children. And so I would like to share some insight about what I observed and what we witnessed when we were at a hotel with tons of families this weekend. So in this episode, we will be talking through why reasoning with your kids doesn't work. And I've talked about this before in different contexts, but this weekend there was an experience at the pool at the hotel that was just so significant for me to watch it happen in real time and in real life. And I wanted to share what that story was and then help you understand why reasoning doesn't work and what you can do instead. So obviously when I'm out, I love to people watch and I see parents and kids interact. And so one of the things that I make note of is when a parent is addressing something or dealing with something with their kids and they're struggling, I wish that I could just walk over and demonstrate a skill that would make things easier, because that's what I see more often than not is parents struggling rather than parents succeeding or thriving or excelling. And that's one of the reasons why this podcast exists, so that I can equip you and that we can be more effective parents. So that's why I'm excited about this topic today. I think that when I got to see it firsthand right in front of me at the hotel, it just reminded me how much we need to keep this in mind, that reasoning does not work with kids. So in this episode, I want to share with you that reasoning and rationalizing is a cognitive construct, meaning we do it cognitively, and kids are not cognitive. So we'll tease that apart and make sense of that together. Point number 2, when we try to do those things, when we reason, when we rationalize, when we are cognitive with our children, and therefore expect them to be, it escalates the situation. And in the past, I've talked to you about the rule of thumb: when a child is drowning, it's not the time to teach them to swim. And that brings us right back to that concept. So we don't want to escalate the situation. We want to de-escalate. So we'll look at a better way to handle that. And then point number 3 is when we use the limit setting skill, which I've also talked about a lot. But when we use that skill, it gets us to the same goal. When we're trying to reason and rationalize with our kids, or when we're setting limits with our kids, in both scenarios, we're trying to get them to more appropriate behavior. It's just that limit setting works more effectively and is easier for us and for our kids. So we will look at all 3 of those points. The path to calm, confident, and in control parenting starts now. All right, so we were at the hotel pool this weekend. My husband was sitting over listening to a podcast, strangely enough, not mine though. I should really talk to him about that. He was listening to a podcast, and then my son and I were swimming, and there were quite a few parents in the pool, and their kids were kind of in and out of the pool, but parents were hanging out as well. And one of the little boys that was swimming, he had a little water shooter type of thing, and he continued to shoot and was kind of just shooting the water at, friends and bugs and leaves or whatever. Well, at one point he shot some of the other kids in the face with the water gun, and his dad saw it. And so his dad, grabbed him, brought him over, and he's holding his son by his shoulders in the pool. So Dad's standing up in the pool. Obviously, child is not tall enough to stand. So dad is holding the child by his shoulders, and they're like face to face looking at each other. And the dad is very sternly and aggressively saying, "You do not shoot your friends in the face. You know better. You are not allowed to do that." And at that point, it's limit setting. It's helping the child understand what is expected behavior. clearly not in the most effective, gentle, respectful way. But at that point, he's trying to set expectations. Well, the child kind of started to wriggle and squirm and was really not happy with being yelled at in his face. And so kind of starts bucking the whole scenario. And so then dad launches into, you are not going to have any friends if you treat your friends that way. No one is going to want to be your friend if you're mean and you shoot people in the face, and you know better. So then at this point, we've transitioned into trying to reason and trying to rationalize what the whole point of his argument is. And so at this point, the child actually kind of starts to like yell and half scream, understandably so. You know, who wants to have someone 8 times your size? And this dad was big. I mean, really large guy. And the little boy was probably 3.5. So huge size differential, huge power differential. And so obviously, little boy is like, no, I'm done with this. So he starts to actually yell. Well, then that makes dad more angry and says, no, you're going to listen to me. And again, he's going on and on and on. And at this point, the child says, let me just go say I'm sorry, which I thought, oh my gosh, like this little boy says in his own way, in 3.5-year-old speak, right? He says, I get it, Dad. I shouldn't have done that. Let me go say I'm sorry. And we don't need to have this conversation anymore. But dad keeps going and going and going. So eventually the little boy starts to kind of swing like fists to get free of the grip. So then dad transitions to, let's have a staring contest. And I thought, oh, okay. So at least dad finally realizes, okay, my approach isn't working. My child isn't responding well. Let's make this more fun. Let's de-escalate this. Let's do a staring contest instead, and we'll just kind of move on from that, but let's regroup so that we leave on a good note. I was very wrong in my interpretation. So the staring contest actually became a manipulative way for dad to get the son to keep looking at him so that he could keep yelling at him. So little boy quickly realizes, no, this isn't really a staring contest, and actually, you know, starts kicking and flailing and splashing. And so dad picks him up and puts him back on the pool deck. And that was the end of the exchange. So I needed to give you the story so you understood the context of what I witnessed. So here's what I want to share first. When we try to reason and rationalize, that is because that is the way we interpret and process the world. We are cognitive, we are rational, we are intellectual in the way that we think about things. Brain-based approach. Adults use their brains and they receive input, they receive data, and they process data through a cognitive process. Kids are 100% the opposite. They receive and interpret everything through their emotions. So when we try to reason why it's not nice to shoot kids in the face with a water gun, when we try to rationalize that they're not going to have any friends and they shouldn't do that, it's absolutely over their heads. They don't receive it. They don't understand it. They can't even grasp it. So it's not just that it doesn't work. It's actually completely futile. There's no reason to even try until a child has abstract reasoning, which doesn't develop until about 12 or 13. So it's literally a waste of time to continue to try to listen, make a child listen to reason and rationalizing approach because they can't even interpret it. One of the stories that I use when I meet with parents at my practice is the equivalent of emotions will rise and rise and rise and rise. And at a certain point, it actually is like a light switch where the brain is told, go take a nap. So when you have emotions get so high, the brain is on a little siesta and they operate and react 100% based on their feeling in that moment. They're here and now, they're emotional, they're me-driven beings. So what do I need to do right now because of what I feel? There's no thought process about it. It is 100% governed by emotions. So when the brain is taking a nap and an adult tries to get the brain to engage, you can see why that doesn't work. So they can't receive it, they don't understand it. It is absolutely a waste of your breath and your energy. But alternatively, you can meet them in their emotion. So we'll look at that in just a moment. So first point, they are emotional. They are not rational. So it does not make any sense to waste your time trying to be reasoning and rationalizing with them. They can't grasp that. Secondly, one of the things that my parents used to say to each other when my brother and I were little is, don't exasperate your children. So my mom would say to my dad, don't exasperate your children. And my dad would say to my mom, don't exasperate your children, when they noticed that one of the, scenarios was not going well and it was frustrating to us kids. And I think about that a lot in my own parenting, in the way that I interact with kids. My goal is to try to be the most encouraging and supportive and understanding adult in the lives of kids in my life. And so when we try to reason and rationalize, that's exactly what it does. It's exasperating. Kids don't get it. They don't understand why you're talking to them. They're not grasping anything you're saying. And especially if it goes on and on and on, in the case of the dad in the pool, that was probably a 4 or 5 minute interaction. And the child was just done. I mean, he was like, leave me alone. I get it. I want to move on. And dad felt the need to keep harping and harping and harping. And it's exasperating. It is frustrating. It is defeating. And then kids start to need to have some power back. You're taking away all of my power. You have all of the control. So then a power struggle ensues. So obviously we don't want to get into power struggles with our kids. A lot of what I talk about is avoiding power struggles. That's why we use the choice giving skill, because it helps reduce power struggles. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to some of the other podcasts or check out some of my articles and videos, we talk a lot about choice giving. So that is one of the ways that we avoid power struggles. But when we are trying to reason and rationalize, it forces a child into a power struggle. And we never want that. We want to meet them where they are and be understanding and respectful and kind with whatever they're feeling in that moment. One of the very fundamental principles of the reflecting feeling skill, which is, I talk about it a lot, it's the primary foundation of play therapy. It's every feeling is valid. Behavior is sometimes not acceptable, but every feeling is valid. So in this case, we would use the limit setting process, which is point number 3. We're getting there in just a second, because we want to acknowledge what the child is feeling and help them understand it's okay that you felt that way, but the behavior needs to be adjusted. So we don't want them to have to switch out of their emotions into their brain because they're not capable of it. We don't want them to end up in a power struggle with us and be frustrated. But finally, we want to use a skill that helps us address the behavior, but still validates where the child is. So when we talk about the limit setting process, it's 3 steps, very easy. I will briefly go over that with you today. And then you are more than welcome to go back and listen to other podcast episodes and check out my articles and my videos that I've already done this topic. So when we think about this scenario in the pool, child's having fun, child's playing, he's been squirting, he's been shooting the water. So that's all fine. So you start with acknowledging that. The first step in the limit setting is acknowledge the feeling. So you say, I know you're having a lot of fun shooting the water gun. I know you've had so much fun being able to play with that toy. I know it's fun to shoot things with the water cannon. So you decide what you want to acknowledge, but you lead with acknowledging that the child is right in feeling that way. I get it. It is fun to shoot things with a water gun. So you want to say, I understand that that's where you are emotionally. So acknowledge the feeling. You lead with that. Then you set the limit, but your friends aren't for shooting in the face. Notice that it's not your friends aren't for shooting, because the dad didn't have an issue with the fact that he'd been shooting the kids all day. He had an issue with the fact that he shot them in the face. So your friends are not for shooting in the face makes it very clear that is the only limit. It's not that I don't want you to shoot the water gun. It's not that I don't want you to shoot the water gun at your friends. It's I don't want you to shoot them in the face. But if you say, but I don't want you to shoot them in the face, that does not make it very clear that that's a limit on behavior. That's a wish that dad is expressing. I don't want you to do that. And the child can think, but I want to, so I'm going to. So you have to be very purposeful with the way that you phrase the limit. It has to be neutral. So your friends are not for shooting in the face. You're not wrong for wanting to. They're just not for shooting in the face. So acknowledge the feeling, communicate the limit, then you target an alternative. You can choose to shoot them in the back, or you can choose to shoot them in their belly. So you give them acceptable alternatives that allow them to do the thing that they wanted to do in the first place. He just wants to shoot his friends in the pool with the water gun. So give him an opportunity to shoot with the water gun. Or if you don't want him to shoot at people, you could say you can choose to shoot at the leaves floating in the pool, or you can choose to shoot at the plants on the edge of the pool deck. So you give the child an opportunity to express the original feeling, which is, it's fun to shoot a water gun. But notice that if the dad had taken the child aside and calmly and lovingly, which I'm going to pause there because limit setting allows you to remain completely calm and in control. There's no aggression, there's no anger, there's no frustration, there's no escalation of tone of voice. You say it as if you're saying the grass is green. So if dad would have taken little boy aside and said, let's say his name was Jack. I don't know what it was, but we'll say Jack. So Jack, I know that you're having so much fun shooting the water gun, but your friends are not for shooting in the face. You can choose to shoot at the plants, or you can choose to shoot at your friends' backs. And then let the child go on his merry way. Now, of course, does parent have to follow up and monitor and see if the child is complying with the limit? Yes, of course. And on a later episode, we'll talk about the ultimate limit, because if the child chose to continue to shoot his friends in the face, then an ultimate limit would be necessary. So pause on that and we'll come back at a later episode. But the parent obviously has some ownership over the outcome, yet the parent never had to get angry, never had to get frustrated. And in that scenario, you trust the child to comply. It was very clear in dad's interaction with the little boy that he was angry and didn't trust him. So he thought he had to scare him into obeying or lecture him into obeying. And the reality is, if you believe that your child is good and you believe that your child is capable of regulating, you acknowledge their feeling, you set a neutral limit, and you offer choices, and you trust them to comply. So you can see how it's a very different scenario, very different outcome and tone when you set a limit versus trying to reason and rationalize. There was no explanation of why. There was no trying to help him see the big picture. No talking about he's not going to have any friends if he continues to do that. None of that is relevant to a 3.5-year-old. All the 3.5-year-old needs to hear is, I understand why you did it, but here's the expectation and here's what you can do instead. Very simple, very easy, respectful, kind, and loving approach to a parenting moment. So look, we all want well-behaved kids, right? That's our goal. We want to have well-behaved kids, but we want to create well-behaved kids in a kind, loving, and respectful way, which is why the play therapy skill approach is so effective, because it is always geared with the relationship in mind. The relationship is everything in our parenting. So we want our approaches to be effective, and the limit setting process is an extremely effective way to do that. So next time you are in a scenario where you would normally lecture, you would normally try to teach a lesson, you would normally try to reason and rationalize, pause and go through this 3-step limit setting process. Acknowledge their feeling, communicate the limit, target an alternative. If you need more coaching, more tips, more help before you embark on that, if this sounds like something you'd like to do, but you say, oh my gosh, in the moment, I know I'm not going to remember that, there are all kinds of resources for you on thekidcounselor.com. I have articles and videos. I have previous podcast episodes. So go back and search limit setting, and you will be able to find more about this skill, more examples, more about how to use it in a practical everyday moment. But rather than leading with the lecture, leading with the reasoning, the rationalizing, catch yourself and lead with the feeling reflection for where the child is. you're really excited. I know you're happy. I know you're having fun, but, and then you set the neutral limit. So please shoot me an email, brenna@thekidcounselor.com. 2 N's, BRENNA, brenna@thekidcounselor.com. Also, don't forget to go to thekidcounselor.com/newsletter, and you can sign up there so that when I'm sharing information with you, you'll be sure to get that. Let me know how that goes. I would love to hear your experience. I would love to know if that was useful, what the scenario was, what the child's reaction was. I think you'll be very surprised at how differently the child responds and how differently you feel when you use this approach rather than reasoning and rationalizing. So in the next episode, I'm going to share another story from vacation about the hours and hours of screen time that kids had at the hotel when we were there. So stay tuned for that. All kinds of stories to share with you about the hours I saw kids holding devices and playing on phones, tablets, iPads, and the like when they were supposed to be enjoying a family vacation getaway. So we will chat about that next time. As always, thanks for being with me. Talk to you again soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Play Therapy Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks. For more parenting training and to subscribe to our newsletter, go to www.thekidcounselor.com.